Welcome to Offscreen. This week we're reading The English Speaker by Terrence Malick. Based on a true tale of 19th century psychoanalysis, Anna O suffers from a strange condition which causes her to understand one language while speaking another.
Well, I'm sure you have plenty to say about Mr. Malick.
Yeah, so he's one of, I might as well get my bias out of the way.
Yep.
He's one of my favorite, not necessarily a bias, I guess, because it is, let me start over. Terrence Malick's one of my favorite filmmakers. He's made, I think, now 7 movies over the course of 40 years, about. He made 2 great movies in the 1970s.
Well,
What?
he made 2 movies.
He made 2 highly acclaimed movies in the 1970s, Badlands and Days of Heaven, and then he was working on a project that later became The Tree of Life. But he was working on that, had traveled all around the world and written scripts. Pre-production had started, and then he decided no. And he left...
No for the pre-Tree of Life thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he didn't make another movie until 1997.
Yeah.
Though apparently he did a lot of work as a screenwriter, as like a hired screenwriter.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, maybe not a lot of work, but he wrote a draft of Dirty Harry. He wrote several other films.
That's bizarre.
Right? Yeah.
Because we should say that, like, his movies they're kind of like art house type of fare. Usually very ethereal, very, like, intellectual and kind of lofty or ponderous.
They're movies that seek to answer the big questions of life. Like, what is the meaning of it?
That's true. I'm often asking of his movies, what is the meaning of it?
Well...
No, I haven't. I haven't seen much.
Then he succeeded in putting you in the shoes of his protagonists.
Yeah, that's it.
Many
I'm
of
sure.
them, at least.
No, I haven't really seen much of his work, but what I have seen, I'm not a fan. I admit it's just.
But you've just seen one. You saw The Thin Red Line.
Yeah, I guess so. So this is purely speculative. I just don't think his movies are my cup of tea.
Right. I mean, that's perfectly fair. As he pushes his stylistic ambitions forward, his movies have gotten even more polarizing and divisive.
Yeah.
His last few movies have had very little on-screen dialogue, and most of it has been like between the camera moving around the characters and the characters moving in relation to each other, and then voiceover.
Mm-hmm.
I'll mispronounce his name, but one film critic described To the Wonder as a ballet, in that like the meanings really derive from how the characters move in relation to one another.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought that was a really good way to approach the movie. I mean, you don't really see too many American filmmakers, at least, being so bold and audacious in how they're choosing to make movies.
Yeah, I mean,
and especially with such big name actors.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. He's worked with some really huge stars. I mean, in his film that is just about to come out, Knight of Cups, Christian Bale is starring in it. Anyway, I think reading this did give me a little bit of insight. He's using a very different kind of language than most screenwriters, I think. But we'll get into that.
Yeah, well,
more.
I'm very excited to hear what you think.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe we should first talk about it in terms of the genre and then jump into the synopsis.
Yeah. Oh, I want to say one other thing.
Mm-hmm.
I read the article that you sent me.
Oh, yeah.
Which was about Thomas Lennon, he's the guy that plays Dangle on Reno 911. He's like primarily a comedic actor and a screenwriter. He was actually in one of the scenes in Knight of Cups, Terrence Malick's latest film, and he gave sort of an interview about his experience that made it sound very bizarre. Which, again, it's hard for me to respect the guy, Terrence Malick, I mean, when I hear some of this stuff. Like, never mind the final product, his process sounds kind of infuriating. Like, he invited Thomas Lennon to be in this scene, and he was there for like 11 hours, it said. And he's in the film for like less than 5 minutes.
Honestly, I don't even remember him being in the film.
Yeah, I mean, he's just like a background actor almost. It's like not a...
Yeah, there's a party, and he's at the party. He's attending the party.
Yeah, that's it. But like, he said that Terrence Malick just gave him a card on set, and on the card it said something like,
There's no such thing as a fireproof wall.
There's no such thing as a fireproof wall. And Thomas was like, is this my line? Do I need to say this? And Terrence Malick's response was just, I don't know. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? And then...
You're supposed to try your best to arrive at truth.
I don't mean to just retell this whole article, but then he said later,
it's a good read.
He was on the phone. We should put it on the Twitter. Can you tweet,
tweet
a link
I'll
to
tweet it for sure.
At OS Podcast. But yeah, he said that he was later on the phone with his wife arguing about like how long this was taking him because he was still on the set. And they started filming him arguing with his wife just without even asking his permission. They just came up to him with a camera and filmed it. So, I don't know. I'm not going to try and let that influence my opinion.
But I don't understand why these are inherently negative things. Like, obviously, if he didn't want
That's kind of a douchey move.
Well, obviously, if he didn't want it used, he could have said that. And he said, and what was his ultimate conclusion? He said that it was one of the most unique and rewarding experiences that he's had on set.
Yeah.
So, in the end, it was good for him. But I mean, if Terrence Malick weren't American and he weren't working with people that everyone knew, like if he weren't working with Batman, then no one would be upset that he's making these weird movies. But I feel like there's just an expectation that he adhere to something more traditional because he is working with huge Hollywood stars.
I have no qualms about that. I don't mind who he's working with or the kind of movies he's making.
Yeah, I don't mean this just of you. I just mean like kind of the general reaction.
Okay.
I feel like that kind of... Not that there aren't plenty of reasons to dislike his movies, and they're obviously very polarizing, and for good reason.
But I just don't know if it's worth it. I mean, like, you hear about experiences like that people have with him on set, where it's just so bizarre and kind of, like, confusing and time-consuming, and then he also spends, like, sometimes a ridiculously long amount of time in post-production, and I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's worth it to me. Not for him, it shouldn't be, and not for audiences to like have to wait years for another one of his movies to come out.
Well, I mean, I don't think we can say whether or not it's worth it to him.
I guess that's for each individual person to decide.
Right, and people still line up to be in his movies, so it's worth it to the actors.
Yeah, well, actors are a weird bunch.
This is true.
Anyway, let me get...
Yeah, so this is it's a period piece. It takes place in Vienna.
Mm-hmm. Late 1800s.
Late 1800s.
It's kind of it's interesting. I didn't expect it, but it's very much of like a Exorcist type story.
It's kind of like an existential horror film.
Yeah, in the vein of some of those like recent possession type horror movies. Uh-huh. It's much more straightforward than some of his other stuff, I think. But
yeah, well, again, this was written, so this was a project that I think he began in the early 90s. And I think he went with that and the Thin Red Line to producers who had been trying to get him to make another movie. And it's like, I'll do either one of these. And I think they picked the Thin Red Line, and that's what he made. But the draft we read is 2002. I know he was working on it at least a decade before that.
Wow. Okay.
Anyways, I'll let you jump into the synopsis.
Okay. Anna O grows up in a wealthy Vienna household in the late 1800s. When she's about 20 years old, her father falls ill, and Anna begins to care for him obsessively. One night, while checking on him, Anna enters her father's bedroom and sees a horrifying vision which she'll go on to repress. All we know for now is that when Anna's mother finds her on the floor afterwards, her right arm is paralyzed and suddenly she's speaking perfect English. The moment passes. Anna returns to normal with no memory of what has happened. But when her English-speaking episodes recur, a doctor named, I'm going to say Brewer. Is that how you pronounce that?
Brower?
I think it's Brewer.
Really?
I don't know.
Okay.
A doctor named Brewer is consulted. Immediately fascinated by Anna's condition and perhaps a little taken by her beauty, Brewer embarks on what will become a full-time occupation, tending to Anna's seemingly dual personalities, accompanied by paralysis and even sustained and terrifying hallucinations, which only worsen upon her father's death. The work puts a strain on the doctor's marriage, and Anna herself loses a fiancé due to the illness. It's only when Brewer manages to recreate the circumstances of Anna's repressed memories that he's able to cure their symptoms. With the help of hypnosis and other unorthodox methods, Anna actually relives that night in her father's bedroom. Strange visions of a snake and a skull are all wrapped up in Anna's own feelings of guilt towards her father, which she can only now begin to reconcile. Having succeeded in his efforts, Brewer goes on to reclaim his marriage, even having a child of his own. Anna's case goes down in history as the beginning of what will become modern psychoanalysis.
Cool.
There you go.
I think it's worth noting that Brower,
Yeah.
Let's go with Brewer. So Brewer is like the most highly regarded doctor of Vienna at the time, has this great reputation, and in treating her, that kind of suffers.
Right.
Because of the unorthodox methods that he uses and his like kind of devotion, obsession with her as a patient.
And he also consults with Sigmund Freud, who is sort of a friend of his. And actually, Freud kind of takes on the case after Brewer leaves. Mm-hmm. Even though she's more or less cured, Anna continues to have...
It sounds like she has relapses often.
Right.
But...
Anyway, that's the gist of it.
Right.
So... What do you think overall? I liked what we did last week where we did the good stuff first. We should do that.
I kind of found it to be a bit of an overwhelming read.
I said start with the good.
I meant that in a good way.
Oh, overwhelmingly good. Okay.
No, not like
but
I found it to be overwhelming.
Affecting.
Yeah, but not in the bad way, in a good way.
Okay.
There's just like a lot, and it's really, really intense at times.
Yeah.
Like the hallucinations that maybe in Doors of Perception that we wanted more of, I feel like we get them here in spades. Oh yeah, and like visualized and I think terrifying.
They're a bit more grounded here, where in like Doors of Perception it was just really psychedelic and trippy. This is like straight up just like demons and snakes and like just really dark, scary stuff.
And it's just like one thing after another, like trying to wrestle with I don't know, like the agony of her existence and like hit Brewer's feelings towards her and towards his wife, and how like for a minute he might find peace, but like for both of them, like that's just also fleeting. And then
it's pretty depressing on the whole.
Yeah,
but like not in a bad way. I mean, it's just
it's like I find this is why I'm like so moved by his movies. I find them very like thoroughly considered.
Yeah. But also, it's worth noting that the screenplay, and I don't know if his other scripts are like this, but he does a lot of very descriptive writing in between the dialogue. Like, it's not just typical screenplay format where you're just giving the visuals. Mm-hmm. He's often, like, very poetic and insightful and not purely visual. So it's, like, not stuff that would actually come across on screen, not in, like, an immediate literal kind of translation anyway.
Right.
It's, like, really descriptive of like just the mood of the scene or of like very subjective things. That's what I took away from this most of all, was that I feel like, and maybe if I go and watch one of his movies now, I'll try to appreciate this a little more, but he seems very obsessed with like capturing subjective viewpoints. Like the shots will be described in terms of this or that character's point of view, or even just like their mental state. Like, this is what it looks like in this person's head right now when they're looking at this scene.
Right.
That sort of thing. So that was kind of fascinating. And it definitely gave me more confidence in Terrence Malick that he does have some method to his madness. There is some reason behind these things.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting to me that this is very much, to me, a story about sort of the inscrutability of other people's inner lives. Uh-huh. And then it just makes sense a little bit to me that Terrence Malick would make movies like this, and why it would be hard to understand his movies. Sure. Because they're about how hard it is to understand this stuff.
Sure.
But then I don't know, like to me, if I was so consumed with these kind of themes, it would be really hard for me to want to make a film because I would feel like nobody's going to understand it. That's my another takeaway is like there's no way I'm going to understand what he's going for with some of these films. Well,
I think, didn't you just articulate it though? That he he's making a movie about the difficulty of understanding others and understanding yourself.
Yeah, but I mean that just seems like an
And
impossible.
that is like an understanding of in and of itself. Like it's
I
like
guess.
a negative space type thing.
Yeah, we're getting very meta here.
I mean, it's like 140 pages of trying to unpack her emotional state.
Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah,
But and also it's not just unique to her. Like the expectation of women is something in here too. Because so much of it is like keeping up pretenses, keeping up appearances, and making sure that you come across as like a proud person, a proud, successful person, even as you conceal your true self.
There's a bit of
from everyone else.
Then
you end up becoming alienated from your true self because you've put on so many masks and so many costumes to appear this other way.
That's good. There's a whole masked like costume ball thing in the beginning of this script, by the way. But also, you reminded me. I read that in real life, Anna Oh went on to become something of a feminist, like an activist.
Oh, really?
And also like a social worker.
Yeah, that's what
they touch on that.
The note at the end says.
Yeah, they touch on that in the script. But anyway, just an interesting little piece of trivia. Also, her name's not actually Anna Oh. That is like her pseudonym that they used in when like Brewer and Freud were writing their journals, like their diaries about the like case studies.
Right.
They didn't want her identity to be revealed.
Right.
So. Also, that reminds me of a point I wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I'm still on the good stuff. I still like this.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of stuff where Brewer is talking in voiceover while he's writing his notes about Anna in his little like log book. He was saying how it seemed like she was getting better for a while. And then that scene bleeds into him talking to Anna's mother, saying the same thing. And you don't really know how much of it is from his journal and how much of it is maybe just a pre-lap, like intro into that conversation with the mother. And just previously, he'd been talking with Anna about how they need to let her mother believe that she's getting better.
Mm-hmm.
She just needs to be able to hang on to that. She needs that hope. And so it's unclear, at least this is how I interpreted it. It was intentionally unclear whether he was actually writing in his logbook that she was getting better, or if he was just saying that to the mom. And it's deliberately left sort of blurred. Those two scenes kind of blur into each other.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating to me, and kind of cool. Because what does it mean? Is she actually getting better? Or how much of getting better is just believing that you're getting better? How much of it is just a psychological thing?
I think that's, really interesting. And there's a lot throughout the screenplay of people like trying to shelter their loved ones from certain realities or certain pieces of information in the hopes that they're like protecting them from suffering. But I think what we find is that they have the best of intentions, but like kind of sometimes to be in pain is part of, being alive, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, there's a really great line.
Yeah.
That I think is explaining what you're getting at.
Good fun.
This is between Anna and Brewer, and she's asking, they were sort of talking about like the outlook for the future for her, if it's going to get better. And she says, you do think, don't you, that people can live a happy life? And Brewer's answer is, they can always live a brave one.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really nice. It's sad, but like very noble, I think, of him to say that. Even if her condition is never going to be completely cured, she does manage, I think, to keep a brave face. And it is maybe about keeping up appearances to some extent, but
or just continuing
it's
continuing to go forward, continuing to try and persevere.
Yeah. So that was a nice little lesson, I think, from the script.
I think that's something that kind of runs throughout his movies, in that there's not really a pat answer to any of these questions, but in continuing to search for them, there is something like a value in that.
Yeah.
Like to persist.
Yeah, there was a lot of that.
Do you want to hop to the
bad stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really have a lot of bad things to say about this. I do think it bothered me. I'm curious what you think about this. So the way that Anna's character is introduced, I found really obnoxious. I don't know. It was off-putting how much they built up Anna O's character being really beautiful and just everyone loves her. I'm just going to read this part right here. It says, a beautiful young woman of spirit and grace. And then the first line is her fiance saying, you see how they all admire you? And then it says, Anna spreads gladness wherever she goes. She is loved by all. That's like in the description lines. Like that's not how you would normally write a screenplay, and it's not visual. It's just like telling us everyone loves her. Right. I found it really obnoxious, and it actually did the opposite for me. Maybe not like her. And maybe that's just because I'm a contrarian sort of person, and if everyone likes something like a hot new trend or something, I'd be like, no, that's stupid. But if you tell me that everyone likes your character, I'm probably not going to like that.
I think that almost it establishes her outward appearance, or it establishes the difference between her outward appearance and her inward feeling. Like, there's at least 6 or 7 times where the mother or the maid says, she was always such a good girl. Right. She was always so happy. She was always such and such and such. All these positive traits, when, from what we've seen of her, she's not happy. Right. She does seem to be trying to be a good person, but
she's really pretty tormented on the inside.
But she's tormented, yeah. She's not content.
So maybe that introduction was supposed to be a little heavy-handed, and that's serving that purpose.
I think because they come back to it so often, they really want it. They really want to underscore that.
Okay.
Would be my defense.
Also, I never really had thought about this much before, but I wonder how tempting it is for an actress or an actor if you're showing them a script and you're like, oh, I want you to play this part. Mm-hmm. And the first thing they read is, everyone loves this person. They're beautiful. And then everyone's like gonna jump at the chance. Oh yeah, that's me. I want to play that role. That's how it gets people like Christian Bale. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, there probably was no Knight of Cups script, but if there were, it probably was something like Christian Bale. Famous, successful.
Yeah.
Loved by all.
Right.
Rich. Dope houses. I think, yeah, you mentioned this earlier, but there's a lot of stuff that doesn't translate directly onto screen. Yeah. And I don't have a problem with that when it does, because, I mean, the script is for the actors in many ways, and if it's informing, like, how they approach a character, that works.
Yeah.
Or if it's informing, like, the mood of a scene or something subjective, that's fine, but there are plenty of descriptive things here that don't do that.
Yeah. I'll mention, well, this is a very little thing which we already kind of hit on, but it does go back and forth a lot between whether Anna is doing better or worse, and there's not a very consistent trajectory to like her health, mm-hmm. which may be true. That's how it actually happened. I don't know, but it's very kind of tiring. I think that's part of what made this kind of exhausting to read, besides the fact that it's just so long. You don't get much sense of progress a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It makes it really like bleak, and it's hard to slog through sometimes.
But unfortunately, there probably isn't much progress.
I mean, maybe you know? Yeah, maybe that's just the truth of it.
Like it's an exhausting experience, and because it kind of like wears down your defenses as a reader.
Yeah. All right. Well, should we get to verdicts?
Yeah. You want to go ahead, or should I go first?
You always go first.
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it, and I'm still processing it. I wish, I wish I sounded.
You shouldn't have waited until minutes before recording to finish reading the script.
That's quite possible.
You'd have more time to process.
Yeah, well, that is true, and also there's just so much reckoning with what it means to be alive, what it means to like know yourself, to interact with other people, to interact in society, and it's kind of, I don't know, I find it beautiful, like that trying. So and it comes as no surprise that I would recommend it. And I'm afraid this movie won't get made because it seems
probably not.
Far too narrative to be of interest of him now. Traditionally narrative.
That's sad
based.
Too. It seems like, I mean, you could argue that he has progressed as a filmmaker depending on what his goals are, but yeah, it seems very likely that he will not want to do this anymore. It's not in line with the trajectory of his career.
Right. Can I read a line from a review of Knight of Cups?
Okay.
So it's kind of random, but I think it speaks to what we're seeing in the characters here and in this movie, and also it really explains a lot of how the Tree of Life, or Knight of Cups is shot.
Okay.
It says Malick is further experimenting with the idea of the central character as a kind of structuring absence.
What does that mean?
So what I take that to mean is that, well, in Knight of Cups, we don't really see Christian Bale like full on that much. He's at like the edge of frames, or the camera's moving around him, kind of just like grazing him. And these characters are in this movie. These characters are kind of like empty in the center, or anguished and tormented is the word they use a lot. And so there's something like missing that's causing them all of this dissatisfaction.
Oh, okay, interesting.
And I think in Knight of Cups he takes that like to a formal level, but here we find it in terms of the characterization of the characters.
Right. Okay.
I'll cut back to the verdicts, but yeah, your turn.
Yeah, I think for me, I was surprisingly happy with this script, and it was much more straightforward than I expected it to be as a Terrence Malick script. I like this story. I think I'm willing to say I would consider the script. I still don't think I can bring myself to consider the writer, just because it is so unconventional and against the usual kind of screenwriting form. I think this can only be appreciated as a script for him to also direct. If this is a script for anyone else to direct, it's not a very good script. I think it's got some big like problems that you would have to explain that he just doesn't, because it's in his head, and you can tell there's a strong vision there, but that's not going to work if you give this script to anyone else. So I like the story, and I like the way he's telling it. I'm willing to consider that, but like only if he's going to direct it. I think is the case.
Ostensibly, he would be the only one to direct it.
Right. So I don't even want to consider him as a writer. That's like a whole separate issue, I think. Like this is just a one-off case where I do actually like the story, and he is the one that is going to have to direct it. So
you appreciate his telling of the story too.
Yeah, yeah. So if it's a matter of considering him as a director, then sure.
Yeah. But you could imagine this story told in a much more conventional and mundane fashion.
I guess, but I think part of what I liked about it were the Malickisms, actually.
Right. Yeah. So he is
So.
bringing something to the table beyond just the actual story that did happen,
Right,
involving Brewer and
right.
N.O. and
True.
Freud.
But I think I have to make that. It's a
hard
hard distinction to make, but yeah, like I would consider the script and this particular story being told by him, but I wouldn't really consider his writing in the future.
Well, maybe at a different point down the line, we can read the draft of Dirty Harry and see what that's like. Because presumably he was never gonna direct that, obviously.
Are you feeling lucky? What does it mean to be lucky? What is luck, really? That's Dirty Harry, right? Is you feeling lucky?
Yeah, I think so.
I just feel like he could spin that in a whole philosophical way.
Right, and I don't know, that's why that's so much of the movie is trying to wrestle with that sort of shit.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you liked it as much as you did.
Despite myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was it provided a lot of insight into Malick's mind.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm very thankful that someone is making movies like this, or aspiring to make movies like this.
Oh, definitely.
Too.
Yeah.
Like, there should be movies of all types.
I agree.
You know?
Yeah.
So next week?
Yeah, wait, what are we reading next week?
I have the list somewhere.
Oh, can we first do all our self-promotion?
You can scope us on Facebook at facebook.com/ospodcast.
Mm-hmm.
Find us on iTunes, off-screen podcast.
Right.
We're on YouTube, SoundCloud.
And the Twitter.
And Twitter.
At OS Podcast. Yeah, and you can email us, info@ospodcast.com. Oh, okay, next week. There it is.
Yeah.
What we're reading. At the draft that we have is called The Cellar, but it went on to become...
Yeah, so what happened was, I think it was written as a spec. I could be wrong, we need to double check this, but it was written as a spec purchased by J.J. Abrams, and then it was...
sort of adapted or rewritten to be a Cloverfield sequel.
Right.
We'll know that for sure next week. But for now, it's called The Cellar. It was written by Josh Campbell and Matt Stukin. When a young woman wakes up in the fortified cellar of a man's farmhouse, she must figure out if the mysterious reason why he says she's there is true or not.
Kind of creepy.
Yeah.